Victoria makes paintings that examine girlhood, adolescence, and identity. She attended Brandeis as an undergrad and graduated with her BA in studio painting in 2014. She went on to earn her postbac degree from Brandeis in 2016 and her MFA in painting from Boston University in 2018. While at Brandeis, she was a member of the women's fencing team. Victoria has moved to New Jersey since quarantine and is wondering where to move next. Her quarantine goal is to make so many paintings, she does not know where to put them. She is on her way there, having created at least 12 paintings since March. Next, we have Farnaz Gholami. Farnaz investigates the idea of place identity, dislocation, and memory in her paintings and installation works. She earned her postbac in studio art from Brandeis University in 2013 and went on to receive a graduate degree in 2017 from Chelsea College and an MFA in painting in 2019 from the Slade, which is in London. Farnaz is originally from Tehran, Iran, and now she lives in London. Since quarantine, she's added more than 20 plants to her small garden, including irises and her favorite, a small lemon tree. Next, we have Jenna Weiss. Jenna Weiss creates paintings and drawings which explore the intersection of shape, color, and pattern. She earned her BA in studio art and art history from Brandeis in 2007, attended the postbac program in 2008, and received her MFA in painting from Temple University's Tyler School of Art in 2010. Jenna is based in Brooklyn, New York. She has ridden over 250 miles on her bike since quarantine began. And now I'm going to introduce the moderators. First, we have Alison Judd. Alison graduated from Brandeis in 2004 with a double major in painting and art history. She continued on to earn her postbac certificate in Brandeis in 2005. While an undergrad, she sang in the a cappella group Mangina and met her husband, who neither sang nor studied art. Currently, she's living with her family in Cape Cod, but typically they live in Brookline, Mass., where she works in her home studio. Alison has spent quarantine tending to her children, her dog, and her sourdough starter. Next, we have Danielle Friedman. Danielle is an artist, educator, and advisor. She earned her BA from Brandeis in studio art in 2009, a postbac certificate in 2012, and her MFA in painting and printmaking from Yale in 2015. Born in Oceanside, New York, she currently lives in Manhattan. During quarantine, she's been working to complete her first children's book entitled My Purple Peacock Penny. And finally, my name is Zoe Messinger. At my current firm, I manage the development of standardized art packages for several hospitality brands. I graduated with a BA in art history and business from Brandeis in 2013. And then on campus, I worked at the Rose Art Museum and was also a member of the women's fencing team like Victoria. Currently, I'm living in New Jersey, but I typically hail from New York City. I spent quarantine digitizing my family's home videos and also fantasizing about adopting a cat. Right now, we'll show a pre-filmed virtual studio tour of each artist, and afterwards, we'll have a live Q&A session with the artists. If you have any questions that you'd like to ask, you can use the chat function to directly message Danielle, who will be moderating that section. We ask that you stay on mute during the Q&A session. I would also like to mention that this event is being recorded for future viewings by those who couldn't make today's Zoom call. If you're uncomfortable with being recorded, please take this time to log off, but we hope that you don't. Thank you all for joining us today. Let's get started. Danielle, why don't you take it away?
Hi guys, welcome. I'm going to play 3 videos. These are edited versions of virtual visits with all 3 of the artists. We're going to start with Victoria Nunley, then we're going to go into Farnaz Gholami's studio, and then we're going to visit Jenna Weiss' studio, and then we'll all reconvene and we'll have our live Q&A. So sit back and enjoy.
Hard pencil on a sketchbook, just being like, let's do this. And then I have to sit back and look and be like, okay, now I gotta do that again. And then eventually it goes to a painting, if it's worthy.
This is Vicky Manly. She is an artist who went to Brandeis for both undergraduate and post-bac. About how Brandeis influenced you.
Oh yeah, Brandeis did so many things for me. Brandeis, I don't know if you know this, but their painting program is like oil painting. So I learned how to mix paint. Susan Lichtman, who's painting professor there, amazing. She really early on was like, black, you can mix a chromatic black. I was like, what is that? And she was like, it's when you mix black from colors that are not. And I was like, what? I went to graduate school at BU. I earned my MFA. And then I moved to New York City and I got a studio. And then COVID happened and then I moved back home.
So why don't you give us a grand tour of your studio and let's talk about some of your pieces.
Amazing. Okay, here we go. I'm looking at them now and I have them hung up because of color and the difference between literal and psychological color. That's something I'm interested in. This is a painting I made also in New York that I think about a lot. And if we turn this way, this is the back of my studio. Another painting I made in Brooklyn. More paintings I made in Brooklyn.
One of the things that I really do enjoy about your pieces is like you manage to make a color palette fresh every time. Like the piece behind you, the one with the woman cutting her hair. How did you think I'm going to make her skin really, really pink?
I had to fight. Well, split complement palette, right? Or like a complement palette. Mm-hmm. So like green and red. I really had to fight because your instinct is to be like, that's not a skin color. Like that doesn't, it's not and it won't. And I was like, no, I'm going to do it. I'm just going to make her pink and I'm going to see what it looks like. And that's also why I like working in acrylic, by the way, is you can make ridiculous color choices. And if it doesn't work, you can just paint right over it. And that hair is a chromatic black. So, you know, man, I don't know. I feel like I'm flying around by the seat of my pants, basically. I'm like, I think this will look good. And then I paint it and I'm like, hunch confirmed. Like, it looks great.
Let's see your sketchbook.
Oh, but you have no idea. Oh, I literally I found the drawing. I made this. I made a ton of drawings. And then I made this like 5 seconds before I decided to paint. It's a really unforgiving drawing. I did pencil, then I did ink, I did no tones. And that's usually how I work. So I really wanted this teardrop shape. I thought that was kind of funny, and it's about breakup bangs. I just sort of went with it. And then when it got translated to the painting, obviously a bunch of different things happened. That's
so funny you pointed out the teardrop. I didn't even notice that before, but now I can't unsee it.
You're welcome. I'm obsessed with like old like 1930s style cartoons. And like one of the reasons why is because there's a lot of transformation that happens. So like in that world, you can have a petal that then maybe turns into like teardrops. Like things can transform into other things, and I'm interested in that.
Well, I love seeing this process because it really kind of exemplifies how you're thinking about, I guess, even perspective and transformation.
I really like looking at, like, this is from Pontormo painting of Jesus being taken off the cross. And just like the drama and just there's so many figures doing things. A lot of times I'll lift from other things as inspiration to try to figure stuff out.
That kind of brings me to my next question, which is materials.
So acrylic paints, I work in that, and it's flat, it's fast, and I feel like I can move quicker through a painting. This is a wet palette, and what it is there's like a sponge under there and paper that you soak, and then you just mix your whole palette on top of it, and it's like a big Tupperware, and it keeps your paint wet so it doesn't dry out. The worst thing about acrylic is that, the best and worst thing about acrylic is that it dries fast. So you don't want to waste all your paint. I use this to mix so paint doesn't get caught in the bristles and I don't waste it. A whole bin full of golden acrylics. And this is a brand I use. It's Holbein acrylic gouache. It's expensive, however, totally worth it. A little bit goes a long way. With gouache, it's sort of like if watercolors and this brand of gouache, if acrylic and watercolor had a baby, it would be Holbein acrylic gouache.
Can you kind of explain to me, how your work, if it has been influenced by quarantine, and also how are you like staying creative during this time? I've been having a very hard time concentrating and getting things done. So I'm very curious how it is for you.
In quarantine, it's just an excuse for me to be like, what if I mix this blue down to gray and then I added an orange? What would that do? And then also it's like a weird like space western theme. It's so For me, quarantine has been really freeing, I think, because I'm like, no one's going to look at this. Except now, you know. A way for me to sort of like work through and really indulge in a lot of the things I've been interested in. Oh my God, I bought so many books. Do you want to see the books I bought?
Yes, always.
Since I've been in, hold on. Yeah, so I bought The Art of Cuphead. It's a game, but it's in the 1930s theme. It's like, what has the most amazing art. Amazing. Vintage Modern, which is just products that have like a vintage twist, but it's in modern times. This was from the Met Museum when they did the Delacroix like drawing show, which was incredible. He did all these like etchings of Faust. And then Tech on Concrete, which is, I can't find the movie anywhere, which is a bummer, but this is the manga it's based on, and it's just delicious. And so I've been just looking and looking and looking and being like, I like that. And then it sort of pops up in what I'm making and indulging in making. And then eventually I feel like it'll cycle into, you know, when it's time to make a big painting, I feel like I'll know, in my heart of hearts, I'll know.
If you had one piece of advice to give artists in anything, what would it be?
Do not be afraid to make bad work. You gotta do it. You have to make terrible work. You have to make your ugly baby and just look at it and live with it. I think I went through a phase of being afraid to make bad work. You gotta just do it so you can get it out and look at it and be like, why is this bad? Because making imaginary bad work doesn't help you, and it also has the ability to like paralyze you. Yeah, just do it. Just the stronger you get and the braver you get, the better your work will be. So that's my advice.
That is great advice.
We're not going to watch CNN. We are now going to go to Farnaz Gholami. So here we go. And just so you know, format-wise, these are about 7 to 8 minutes each video. So they're kind of just a quick view inside each of these artists' worlds. So hi, Farnaz Gholami.
Hi.
You're
Thanks for having me, Danielle.
We're so glad to have you. We can't wait to see what you're working on and hear a little bit about your work. So can you give us just a brief introduction of where you come from, where you're living now, and what you're doing, what you're working on?
I'm based in London and currently in the lockdown at home. I finished my MFA from the Slade School of Fine Arts a year ago. I'm originally from Iran. I grew up in Iran, and then before studying here, I've been living in South Africa for a few years, and before that I was in Boston studying studio art at Brandeis.
Amazing. So we have a ton of Brandeis viewers, obviously. This is the first series of Brandeis studio tours and visits, and we're kind of exploring how some of our artists also are working from home or changing their studio situation, and how maybe that makes them more creative, or they're facing different obstacles in their work, or maybe it's opening up something new. Generally, like, what are your paintings about? What are you investigating, and what's important to you?
So my paintings are usually deal around the idea of non-place or the third space. And it's kind of a conceptual term, meaning that it's like another term, it's called heterotopia, that Michel Foucault spoke about it, but it's something that we are familiar with, which is, for me, in my personal level, I come from a first place, which is Iran, and then I've been living in other places as the destination, but now I'm in that position that none of these places are home, and I find like a conceptual space as an individual to belong to, which is a non-place. But this is, it can be expanded more in a social term. Like in 21st century, we are very much dislocated. Even if we are geographically in one place, we might be intellectually displaced with the society that we're from. And that third place is a promising place. It could be very imaginary, it could be ambiguous and vague, but it's an elsewhere. So I'm interested in the idea of elsewhere, but at the same time, the exciting part for me is that fine line between an ideal place or a dystopian place. So I like that limbo of the in-betweenness, to work on it, and that's what my paintings thrive on. So I usually take like empty spaces as metaphors.
Can you show us what you're working on, and
Yes.
show us or give us a tour of your space? And
So this is middle of my living room. This side is the actual living room that I pushed back, and then this side is the kitchen that my partner has his home office there. So it's very congested, but still I'm very grateful to have this space. And then that's the easel that I have, and this is one of the recent works that I've done. I've been since the lockdown, I've been working on like sketching and painting cinemas, like empty cinemas. There's another cinema in a landscape happening here. This one is a bit bigger, so I ordered 2 sizes of canvases. And then another element that is very important in my paintings are memory and like fragmentation of memory. So I work with like space, memory, and they all deal with, I would say at the end, identity. Then I have 2 discs. This one is my palette, and I have my paints down here. And the other disc is mainly for drawing. So which I've been working on. So these are all like the cinemas. Lots of empty chairs. Then
these are all acrylic on paper?
these are like ink, acrylic, watercolor, pen, like different, but they're all water-based. I've done few swimming pool paintings. Swimming pool is also another limbo space for me. I'm trying different things, like the ideas that I had. And after such a long time, I've been very focused on my sketchbook. So usually my sketchbook ends up with very like fast drawings or notes, but this time I've been like some bathroom drawings. This is the sketchbook that I for the first time.
Can we look at that? Let's look at like one painting and just talk about it if you're up for that.
Yeah,
Kind of like that. The 2 things that caught my eye are the one on the easel, because I'm looking at it in conjunction with the red rug. I just feel like color with like those green plants and the red rug, I feel like there's a color conversation happening that maybe wouldn't have necessarily happened had you made that painting outside of this space.
This one, and you're right, because like in a studio, we usually very much minimize the colors around us so we can focus on the painting itself. But here, with having the colors in the domestic area, I think I'm embracing it. It's suggesting new palette to me.
So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for observing this. Yeah, there are times that I feel very devastated, but I'm embracing it. I'm embracing it.
Totally. Good. So we're going to see you shortly live so we can kind of have a conversation and talk to you.
Great.
All right. Now we have Jenna Weiss.
The amazing thing about a studio practice is, you know, it keeps going. And a lot of us are kind of interested in the same, like, foundational things throughout our life. But what that looks like continues to change if you keep, like, nurturing it. So yeah, just paint and pay attention.
Jenna, welcome. Thank you
Hi.
so much for being part of this virtual artist studio tour that we are doing in this strange time that we're all living in. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about where you were born and where you're living now.
Sure. Thank you for having me. Well, you're speaking to me now in my bedroom in Brooklyn. And so this is now my office space, my studio space, my workout space. It's my everything space. And it's not too far from where I was born. I grew up in Long Island on the South Shore near JFK. And then I moved to Brandeis right after high school. And so I lived in Boston a little bit after Brandeis. I did both the major in fine arts studio and art history together and the post-bac program for a year. And then I went to Tyler School of Art in Philadelphia, where I lived for 4 years about total. And during that time, I worked at the Rose Art Museum when I was at Brandeis, and I worked at the Institute of Contemporary Art in Philadelphia after grad school. And then when I moved to New York in 2012, I started working at the Jewish Museum shortly after that. So I've always had career in museums and also studio practice together.
Tell me a little bit about what that kind of connection between working in the museums and the studio practice, you know, how they go hand in hand for you.
So in my studio practice, part of, I think, what's been a journey for me is the Jewish part of that, because I work at a Jewish institution or we're an art museum and a cultural institution, and what that, sometimes it's been, an interesting question of what my work is about, what the source material is, the reference material. I would say I make non-representational paintings, but sometimes they come from representational source material. So there's a lot in my studio practice that involves just kind of collecting found material, patterns, images, and kind of combining these things all together. And sometimes the personal references like peek their way through. And that's something, that I don't always think I was super interested in or comfortable with when I was younger, but I've kind of like now come to just accept it as like all part of like the mush togetherness of what my life and identity is.
In terms of your studio, are there kind of artists that influence you, or special pieces maybe by friends or artists that you like to keep around? Just, I know in my own studio, like I always have my favorite people that I have like a little piece by that I got over the years.
It's definitely like the trades and the friend work that I have both like, up behind me, there's like a screen print and marble by Cheryl Oppenheim, who's another Brandeis alum. In my living room, there's a painting by Nomi Safran Han, who's another friend of mine from college. So, I know that Brandeis people are going to watch this, so those friendships run deep. And for people from grad school too, definitely in my studio is in Brooklyn. Normally it's in the Brooklyn Army Terminal. I tend to think about influences in the work, like early 20th century, like collage, Matisse, like big one. And then like women abstract expressionist painters are another like favorite of mine. But in the studio, and my house, I try to have work from friends. And my partner's a photographer. So I think the two of us have kind of like amalgamated this collection of work together from people we know.
That's great. Yeah, I love having collections and, gathering work from friends and teachers and people along the journey. I think that makes a huge difference as a working artist.
I had been for a little while, like the past couple of years, I'd been making like wall collages where I kind of assemble like a flattened still life on the wall. So I'll pin up like wallpaper or like vinyl or something that I find. And then there'll be some sort of like low relief sculpture with maybe some found object like ceramic or a piece of wood or a postcard and wrapping paper, some, like things like that kind of like have a bit of randomness to them. And so I've been making, in a way, like sometimes very representational, like observational paintings of those things, while I'm always also making like drawings of them and collages of them, and kind of like trying to reduce what I'm looking at into very more simple elements. And so there's kind of like a cycle that will happen where I might make a collage version of something, and then like the negative shape from a piece of paper that I cut becomes like more important to me than what I was actually looking at when I started making it. And then that will kind of like kick off the next phase of working. So I'm working both in oil paint, usually when I'm in my studio in Brooklyn. This is my studio right now, is on a tabletop in my bedroom. And this is a painting that I brought home with me that I was working on at the end of February and the beginning of March. So I took it here to finish it. And it's on wood panel made with acrylic and tape. So it comes from a real source, but again, it's like a really reduced version of what the original source material was. And I've just been doing some very small work on paper here. I've been making, these are cards, but they're, these are kind of like really, really simple, like line and stencil work. I love stencils. I usually use a lot of stencils. My stencils that I've been making here are really rudimentary and simple, but I love stencils because it's like the positive and the negative happen together. So it's kind of this like immediate satisfaction. And this is my box of supplies, that basically everything I brought home from my studio is in that box. And then those 2 bags are knitting material. And I also have a knitting practice, which is like, you know, aside from my studio practice, something that I've been doing for a long time, but I was thinking about how there's something in the way that I work in the studio where, especially when things are just left to develop their own narrative and you might not really know what's gonna happen when you start a piece or a project, the knitting is kind of the opposite, because it's like you follow a pattern and you have a planned outcome, and you can only do something like a certain rhythm or a certain rate, speed. So I kind of enjoy that I have both of those experiences happening together, at least in my domestic space right now.
What's one thing that you need in your studio at all times, and why?
I was thinking about things that I need in my studio, and whenever I set up a new studio, I've been in the same building. I've had my studio in the same building since 2011. Now, the longest I've ever had a studio in one place, which is kind of miraculous in New York and in general. But I always put up a few kind of like signpost things for myself to like claim a space, you know, as a space that I want to work in, or like know that I have some intentionality behind working in. And one example comes actually from Brandeis, from the building at Prospect Street, which I know is not the studio building anymore. But I inherited someone's studio when I was a postback, and on the walls they had written paint, the words paint and pay attention. And I thought those were just like some imaginary to-do list that like who knew who wrote it and when. But I brought it even like to this desk on this piece of paper.
I'm going to spotlight it.
So that, you know, it's like a little reminder that this is also my studio right now. And yeah, take it however you want. And aside from that, I also, you know, books, like art books and like my iPod are pretty important in my studio.
That's awesome.
Okay, so welcome live. So now you have a little bit of a view into, oh, I think, hold on, let me pause my, YouTube is playing. Okay, so thank you so much, Farnaz, Jenna, and Victoria, for opening the doors into your worlds, just a view into them and sharing with us what you're up to. So we're gonna have a Q&A discussion with the artists, and then as you are all the participants thinking and your imagination's going, please feel welcome to shoot your questions in the chat box. You can direct them directly at me, and then I can sift through those and we'll get to them at the very end of our discussion. So we're going to start with like the most big, basic, but most complex question, which is, what is color? And maybe Jenna, you can start us off.
It's Now I knew you would pick me to go first for this. You know, it's such a big question, but I guess like I was thinking about how to answer it, and the way that color interests me the most is the way that like color and form when they lock together. So that can happen anywhere, and I think that's, for me, it's about paying attention, like to the things you find around you. Like, I mean, I have a tendency to really like bright, hot color and use it in the work. But I love the idea of like when a color feels intrinsically connected to an object or to a shape. So that's one way that I think about color.
Yeah, definitely. And I think Victoria, you also kind of are really thinking a lot about temperature of color as well. Jenna, we can see it really straightforward in your work, like those hot colors. And Victoria, I know you're thinking about that interlocking too. So how are you thinking about color?
You know, I think about color in the way it can help move your eye around a composition and create like a rhythm. And also how, you know, just like Jenna said, it has to do with color is relative. So, you know, a color will do certain things depending on what's around it. I think about that a lot when I'm painting. So like a green can appear more blue or more acidic or even gray depending on, you know, the rest of your palette. So it's really exciting. A green next to a red of the same value the edge will actually vibrate. And so that's such an exciting way to make, you know, a mood happen, or just to deliver even like a narrative element too.
Yeah, and I would add, like color is so much about light, and we've been having these crazy thunderstorms like here the last couple days. And I went for a walk the other night, like right as it was getting like turning dark, and like the way that the color, like the street lamps, like the electric color, like is kind of amplified by the light. Like, you know, it's whatever that might be, totally something that's not present like on the onset in my work, but I think, you know, light and color, shape, those, like how those things are all like connecting together.
Definitely a painter's way of seeing and walking through the world, Jenna. And Farnaz, you also kind of, your color shifted a lot in this quarantine time, especially being at working in the midst of your living space. So can you tell us a little bit about how you think about color in your work?
Yeah, definitely. So color for me, as Victoria and Jenna were saying, is something that can create like mood, space, or a narrative. And it's fascinating because it can be used as a reference point to an art history or society. So it can be loaded. It's very fascinating to use color when you know it's very much loaded. But for me, I like how unpredictable can colors be. So it has its own autonomy in a sense that not always I'm in control of the color. And when it's in my head, it's going to be very different when it dries on a canvas. So I think the excitement part of it that adds to the mystery of painting, for me, is important for color. Yeah. I don't know if that made sense or not.
It absolutely does. Yeah, I love that way of thinking about color. The mystery and the surprises are key elements when you're creating. So, Zoe, I think you have a couple of questions for us.
I think you're still on mute, Zoe.
I am. Okay, so my first question to all of you is, if you could describe your work in 3 words, what would they be and why? I'll have Jenna, why don't you go first?
Oh, great. I don't know, like
On the spot.
I'm just gonna say the first 3 words that I wrote down, which were fill, empty, repeat, because I was watching over the video that we just played, and I do think there is like a continual like filling up, emptying out, and like the repeating of that process that I'm always doing. I mean, repetition is kind of like a main word, almost in a category of itself. Like the way I kind of got into pattern was about like single shapes and then like what happens when you repeat them. So that's like a fascination, but like empty, fill, repeat, those are my words.
Nice. How about you, Farnaz?
Oh, I would say place identity, in-betweenness, and painting with capital P. So for me, the act of painting itself and painting in contemporary art is very important. And at the same time, the concepts that I'm interested in working are equally important. So these three, I would say, would define my practice.
Thank you. And last one, Vicky, go.
My words are humorous, intimate, and sincere. I think that about sums it up.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
I mean, I think looking at my paintings, you could see the humor in them. I talked during our studio visit, it's not in the video, but about how I can't really chase the humor out of it. It's part of me, and therefore it's part of the painting. But there's also a sincerity about it, and especially making, work that has, characters and narratives that are often over dramatic. There's still a sense, like when someone is being very dramatic, there's a real seriousness and sincerity behind that emotion that I find particularly interesting. And intimate because it's just, I mean, they're sort of close looks at moments that maybe would otherwise not be privy to anyone else. So is that enough elaboration?
That is enough elaboration for me.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you. Alison, I guess I'll save my question for a little bit later, but why don't you go ahead with yours?
Sure. So can you guys maybe share both the biggest challenge and the greatest reward that you've experienced in making time for your studio practice?
I would say the biggest challenge was finding my studio space. Back when I lived in New York, finding that studio was the biggest sort of like hurdle to get over. But once I got it, it cycled into the biggest reward, right? Because then I had my own space and practice, and I really felt like, okay, now I can call myself a painter. I don't think before I sort of felt like, well, I can't call myself a painter if I'm not making paintings. So like basically both those are folded into, just finding the studio.
How about you, Jenna?
Sure. I'm in a way, like I had an easy time finding a studio, but it's been a long time since I've had it. And I definitely, I talked about this in the video a bit, but my work-life balance is probably the bigger challenge for me with studio practice, because I have like a full-time museum job. So I have a definite relationship to the art world through like my professional Jenna, and like the studio practice part of me somehow fits into like life Jenna, but really like it's been about this journey of understanding that that's all me. That's like all those things in the best possible sense should affect each other. I meet artists, I work with artists, and in my role at the museum that I work at, that's fulfilling. And it's also about your studio practice is about the connection to the artist community that you're part of. So how do you keep those relationships going and those relationships moving? So it's a challenge for sure. I mean, it's a challenge in the way that it's affected the way I paint, which is I paint a lot slower than I did when I was in college and making big splashy expressionist paintings. And I, now being at home, I'm painting a lot smaller. So it's slower and smaller, but trying to be just make choices in the work. But it's also rewarding because it's about this community of artists that you're connected to. And, I have a little gallery project that now exists on Instagram. And, that's one of the ways that we're all encountering the world, but it's about continuing those connections and artist relationships, some of which, they're from Brandeis, and they keep going. So it's like a continual evolution of how the relationship between life and work goes.
And I would say the combination of Jenna and Victoria would be my answer too, because in the last year I had various art studios, so I was moving a lot, and none of the studios were suitable for me. So I'm still in search of my ideal space, and that really takes energy. And also having a balance and switching my personalities between my studio life and my part-time job, and I work in a gallery in London. So it's not just the time that I sacrifice out of the studio, but also the mindset that it needs to be changed from a creator to a person in a gallery. Yeah, and hopefully I can find a better studio in a few months' time after the lockdown, before the second wave, I would say. And then I would be more focused for sure.
You'll find your perfect studio, Farnaz, especially with all of our support. So I would like to hear about, I read this like brilliant article, this painter, he talked about how we have so much information today in our world. We look at so many images, so much news, and how the best artists have to be the best editors in a sense. And we really have to edit as artists. So I wanted you to talk about just briefly what does your editorial process look like for each of you?
I thought a lot about this, and I realized I do have one. So I work in cycles, so if I'm not painting, I'm then just looking at images and reading information. And I sort of I take screenshots, and I have a little vision board for myself where why do I find these things interesting? Usually if I like a work, it's because it's doing something that I find really interesting. But once I do all my sketches and sort of figure out what I'm painting, I don't look at any of it anymore. So when I'm making, I'm not looking, and when I'm looking, I'm not making. And I think it helps me sort of make sure everything that I'm making is my own, and also keeping other voices or influences out of my head while I'm making my work, which I think is important. Sometimes you can get a little paralyzed thinking about other things, but this is sort of the way I found to work in order to keep me to myself in my practice.
Thanks, Victoria. That's really insightful. What about you, Jenna?
Yeah, no, I mean, what Victoria's saying is really hard to do, keeping the other voices out of your head part. I mean, the way that I thought about your question was in the very kind of personal way of editing. What do you share with what are you choosing to share? In the 10 years since Instagram has existed, how do artists that are young artists making work, how do we feel pressure to put work out into the world, and where can we, so making editorial choices about that is sort of how I took your question. I also think in the actual making of work itself, it's about those friends of mine. In the actual making of work itself, it's about restraint. I think for me is how I think about being an editorial voice for yourself, knowing when to stop on a painting, and I think you could have strategies to help you with that. You might have versions of something going, so you don't make all your choices on one single canvas or one single object. That's one way I think about it.
Super practical. Thank you, Jenna. What about you, Farnaz?
So this is something that I have encountered and struggled. So what I've realized is that we don't necessarily realize how overwhelming it is to receive so many visual information during a day via phone and internet. So what I've done for myself is that I closed my private Instagram account. I've limited myself time per day to have access to my Instagram, and whenever I have pictures that I'm downloading, I'm putting them in different folders. So I'm giving them somehow organizing them to make sense. Otherwise, they were just noises in my head that I couldn't paint when I had so many pictures in my head. So same that Victoria was saying, that it's either you see those images or you work, and it's we need to be very careful about what we receive, especially in these days. So yeah, I've limited my access to the internet.
Thanks, Farnaz. I think Zoe has a question for you.
I do. I'm always on mute. What is a professional goal of yours that you have, one, already achieved, and two, what do you hope is going to be a professional goal of yours for your lifetime? We're just going to go big.
Oh boy, we're going big. All right. Well, I haven't really achieved any, or I guess small goals is I'm making paintings that I think are good, which, I mean, I think we're our own worst enemy, so that feels good. And I'm just gonna keep it on the smaller side. I know you said to go big, but I would like a solo show. I think that's like a pretty common goal, and I have it. So that's my goal.
That's great. How about you, Jenna?
Sure, that's a good goal. Yeah, I mean, just keeping painting is, I think, a really important goal for me. And continuing the community stuff that I was talking about, you know, like trying to find, like, not expecting the art world like to come to you, but to like find your place that you want to be in it, you know, whether it's through writing, whether it's through curating, whether it's through making, and ideally like those things might inform each other, but kind of you have to be around in it for a little while and say like, what's the part of this that's interesting to me, and how can I engage with it? So I guess my goals like fit into finding those places. Yeah.
My goal is very ambitious because I feel like being an artist is very solo activity. It's very lonely activity. So I hope there would be someday that my art career in a position that I can give back to community and help the younger, passionate one somehow, whether it's like making other like different platforms, or I haven't thought through it in detail, but I would say giving back, because from the starting point, there were people who gave different energy and instructions to me. So I hope one day I can do the same.
That's a great goal. I think that's something that we should all try to achieve.
Yeah, and I would say I would add one more kind of question, thinking along those lines. Do you guys make your art with an audience in mind?
I can go first. So for my paintings, it's just me and the painting. So it's about art itself and the concept that I'm dealing with. But for the site-specific works, I definitely think about the audience and how they would encounter it and how they would interact with the site-specific work. So for me, it's very different in what I'm making.
Yeah, I would agree with Farnaz. For the few times that I've made like an installation that work is like interacting with or hanging on, or like it's a wall that's a whole wall painting, I think about the setting that the work is and what the requirements or the demands of it are. But I don't think like, I can't really think about audience, you know, completely, because everyone's reaction to things is different, especially when you're making work that's like deals with like universal shape and symbol and stuff like that. Everyone's going to bring something to it, which I think is fine and great. And now I've like, you know, I've gotten over my like fears and anxieties about that. But yeah, so I think I have to have a personal relationship before I can think about the audience relationship to the work.
My audience that I think about is just past versions of myself. So me from, 6 months ago, or me from, 15 years ago, those versions of myself, that's my audience for me when I'm painting. But otherwise, like Jenna said, you don't really know how things are going to be understood by anyone else, because things mean different things to different people. So that's the scope I have to narrow it down to.
So I think we're going to open up the floor to some questions from our participants. We have some amazing questions. We're just going to get to a few because I know we're getting close to our time. And then Alison's going to make some amazing and grateful closing remarks for everybody here with some vital information. So we're going to get to a few questions here. One from Peter Kalb, who is a professor at Brandeis. We've all had the privilege of taking class with him, so thank you, Peter. Peter says, I am curious if any of the painters, and also Peter, feel free to unmute yourself during this if you have any, if you want to open that dialogue. I'm curious if any of the painters could talk about the presence of political content or emotional personal content in either the images you make or the way that you make them. Empty theaters, for example, group figural scenes, and empty fill repeat each seem really rich with content.
All right, I mean, I'll go. So I guess my work is political because being a woman is political. So, you know, I think my work is political sort of just in the nature of how the world that we live in now. And that's this kind of the simplest answer for it, like right now. Of course, I'm dealing with way different stuff than Jenna and Farnaz. Do you guys have any thoughts?
No, I think that's a really good building block, Victoria. You know, like being a painter is a political choice in some way, you know, like this world that we live in is not set up to like support you to be a painter, like money, capitalism, rent, all that stuff. Like, so whether, you know, fighting to have a space to paint is like a choice that you make. I mean, I sort of felt like I answered some of that question, and I'm glad you raised his larger question from the Q&A. Like, I haven't felt like the last month, like it's been really hard to paint because there's other things like to be doing that are more like overtly political. But I also think it's like about what my other platforms are for like trying to address those topics. Cause I'm not gonna switch like all of a sudden making like overtly political paintings. It wouldn't feel true to like the work that I make. But in some way, like things are a response to the environment we're in, for sure. So
I also, Jenna, I feel like that there was sort of a similar question that was kicked around before we started, which is like, and my answer to it was, I think it'll be a while for me to digest what's going on now, and it'll probably come out later. Like, I think the digestion period for current events can be long for artists.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and for me, definitely political, in a sense that it's layered. So I'm the same as Jenna and Victoria, not overtly political, but political in a sense that being an outsider. So as a personal level, I don't feel fit into any community. So being an outsider and not fitting in is what I think it can be very political. In especially I'm coming from Middle East and living in West, and also not having any exotic pattern element in my painting. I think it's political because that's some kind of conversation that many times has been raised for me, that there is a stereotype, there is an expectation of a woman from Iran to be, and just having my own voice as an artist, period, I think it's a political act. So these are how I interact well, in a sense, with the works that I make. But I would say they're indirect. They're not very overtly political. And I would say my activities outside of art practice would be more influential in this stage of my career.
I also think, kind of thinking to Victoria's observation about how it takes time to kind of see from that bird's eye view sometimes. And when Farnaz and I recorded her studio visit, about a day later on the front page of the Wall Street Journal was this big empty soccer stadium. And I texted her a picture of it, and I was like, Farnaz, you know, these seats are emptying out. Like, you know, sometimes as painters, we kind of tap into these things that are happening in the vibrations and in the air. And it's really important that we have people who see this work and have conversations about it, because it's often political in ways that we can't see when we're making it. And then when we live through these experiences, as Victoria says, and digest them and we see it, it becomes a much bigger, more important conversation. So we're gonna get to 2 more questions, really great ones. This one, if we can keep it to kind of like a brief, it's a really straight shot. What makes an ideal studio space? So maybe if you can name like 1 or 2 things that you want in your ideal studio. That makes it ideal for you.
I have a good list after having unsuccessful studios. I would say a self-contained space with good walls and good light, and good amount of floor space to just play around with different paintings. And I would say it's a modest request for an art studio, but I haven't found it yet.
I would agree with that good lighting. I had a studio in graduate school where I thought something was like happening to me because the lighting was a little bit yellow. So at night, the color of my painting would change, and I'd be like, is that what is happening? Like, I would have to like go out, so I had to switch the bulbs to make the lighting like correct. So lighting is huge. It doesn't necessarily mean a window, but it does mean like, you know, the bulbs need to at least be right.
I'm sure for your work that was extremely frustrating. I can only imagine. Yeah, I think walls are more important for me, but like access, like natural light that's near enough, but walls are important. And then I don't know, I keep talking about community so much, but that is really important for studio space. Like, we're all in this weird quarantine situation, so like our home space is, you know, what it is, and we're making it the best that it can be. But if your studio is somewhere that you can take a break and have a conversation about something with someone for half an hour and then go back to painting, that's like ideal for me.
Definitely. Great. And so as we get to our last question, which is, we really have so many amazing questions. Thank you. And that was Pam Master for the last question. So thank you, Pam, for that. We're in the midst of kind of formatting these visits. So thank you for your patience. And as we figure out kind of what works the best in terms of timing. So this last question is from Aviva Bogart, and it's a very hands-on question and process-based question, which I really appreciate. It's, what would you say is the real change in process moving from sketchbook to one of your paintings? And you guys have all shown us a window into your sketchbook, so we know that's an integral part of your practice.
Okay, I'll go. The big thing for me, the big step, the big leap is color. It kind of ties into that first question we talked about, which is like, what is color? The success of a painting and whether or not a drawing of mine can be made into a good painting is what the color is doing. Sometimes with drawings, I will make like a little gouache of it to see if the colors are working, but mostly I do leap from that black and white hard drawing to a painting. And I think that sort of sounds wild that I do that, but it gets me excited about painting to have color suddenly come into it, and that's what gets me like really excited to begin. So that's my answer.
Yeah, and I'll keep thinking like pretty formally, but scale is, I guess, the biggest change for me. Like when you're in a sketchbook or you're working small, and then like, to me, a painting is usually, not always, but it's often larger than the thing that you're drawing. So what is the relationship literally to like the brush that you're using, to like the object that you're, like, for me, sometimes I work a lot in like things that are like the one-to-one relationship, like, you know, this is the actual size of my hand, that's the size of the mark on the painting. And so that's a different experience in the sketchbook, or like the drawing process.
And for me, most of the time, the sketchbook is a starting point. So the finished painting sometimes, or maybe often, won't look similar to what I've sketched, but it would give me a starting point, and then the process of painting and layering would suggest me how to go next. So it's a dialogue between the act of painting and what I'm after intellectually. So it definitely is different to sketchbook image.
Wow, well, thank you guys so much. This has been a really great hour of kind of spending time with you all and hearing a little bit about your process and your studios and your work. On behalf of the Brandeis Alumni Arts Network, we want to thank you all for participating, both artists and participants. We hope to continue this series of virtual studio visits, and we welcome the feedback that you're willing to share. So please email us at artsalumni@liststopbrandeis.edu. We'll include a link to that email in the chat as well. And in the chat, we've also included links to the artist's website and to a bunch of our Facebook pages and Instagram pages for all the alumni arts events that we do and we organize all year. So please make sure to join if you're interested in either joining those networks or finding out more about programs that we are running. Also, please keep an eye out for an email from us that will include upcoming visits, as well as information about how to purchase pieces from the artists, kind of tying back to Brandeis. We are working on that. So please keep your eye out for an email, and we look forward to seeing you guys at future events like this. Thank you all so much, and have a great rest of your day.